Hello and welcome to Topic 9, Lecture 1. And in this lecture, we're going to be defining public opinion. All right, so for this week, we start the last unit for this semester. Up to this point, we've had 2 units. The first unit was on the foundations of American government, where you learned about the Constitution and civil liberties and civil rights, federalism. And we just got done with the second unit, which focused on the institutions of government: Congress, the presidency, and the federal judiciary. Now we move on to our third unit, and our third unit has to do with politics. You'll remember earlier in the semester, we defined politics as the conflict and struggle over the leadership, structure, and policies of government. And so this last unit is all about how people engage in that struggle over who's going to lead us and the struggle over what kind of policies our government is going to implement. We start that journey by taking a look at public opinion, and that's what topic 9 deals with. And you might be thinking, well, what does public opinion have to do with politics? Well, public opinion has a lot to do with politics because the public opinion is basically the values and beliefs that you have about political issues and personalities and events. And our political values and beliefs shape how we engage in politics. So what we believe politically and what we value politically is going to translate into who we're going to vote for, what political party we are going to affiliate with, and also the kinds of public policies that we support. So public opinion has a lot to do with politics. Public opinion also has to do with politics because one of the things you'll be learning about in this chapter is how public opinion is measured. And so when we measure public opinion by using public opinion polls, it helps give government officials and others that are making decisions on our behalf, it gives them knowledge about what the attitudes and the beliefs of the broader public are. After public opinion, we're going to be, our next unit or topic looks at the media. Voting, and then we'll look at voting and participation, and then campaigns and elections. And so we've got 4 topics that are left for the end of the semester, and then that will close out what you're going to be learning about in terms of American government. So chapter 6, so we're on topic 9, and you'll be reading chapter 6 for topic 9. It covers a lot of materials. And so in this lecture, we are going to focus on defining what public opinion is and talking about the roles that political values play in shaping our public opinion. That's what we're going to do in this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to be taking a look at what political socialization is and agents of political socialization. The discussion this week is dedicated to learning about ideologies. So there's actually another short lecture video that you watch for the discussion where you're going to be learning about the difference between liberals and conservatives. And then you're going to apply what you learn to reading an essay that allows you to say, oh, is the person who wrote this essay, is this written from a liberal perspective, a conservative perspective? And so you'll get to apply what you're learning about those different ideologies. And then we're not going to talk about this in the lectures that I make, but there's in your textbook, you're going to learn about how public opinion is measured through public opinion surveys. And if done right, they can be very accurate, although there's always going to be a margin of error. So there's a short video from 538 that you're going to be watching that gives you a good overview of the science behind public opinion surveys. And there's also a lot of information in the textbook that you'll be reading about. So like I said, chapter 6 covers a lot of material. Some of it will cover in lecture, and the others you'll be responsible for. The other information you'll be responsible for through reading in the textbook. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so what is public opinion? Well, public opinion is defined in your textbook as the attitudes people have about issues, events, and personalities. And since we're talking about public opinion in relationship to American government, we're talking about the attitudes that people have about political issue, political events, and political personalities, like people running for office or those who already hold office. And your textbook talks about attitudes. They define attitudes as being these specific preferences that you have on an issue, right? So, for example, if you have a preference for a candidate, right, then that's the attitude that you have about that candidate, and that would be an example of your public opinion. And so here are just some questions to get you thinking about, like, what is your attitude or what's your public opinion towards these specific issues? So here's a question. Do you think that should the government mandate that all healthcare workers be vaccinated against COVID-19? Okay. Yes, you think that the government should mandate that all healthcare workers should get the vaccine, or no, they should not mandate that. They should leave it up to, the individual. Well, how you answer that is a reflection of what your public opinion is. Do you support the use of affirmative action in college admissions? When people are getting admitted to college and they submit their college application materials, should the board, the admissions board, be able to look at a person's race or gender as a part of what they consider as to whether or not they should be admitted to the college? How you answer that is your public opinion. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we had a discussion that was a reflection of your public opinion on the Electoral College. What was your attitude? Was your preference to get rid of the Electoral College or to keep the Electoral College? Okay, so all of those are examples of when you answer those, that's a reflection of your attitudes, and that your attitudes and your preferences are what constitutes public opinion. Okay. So the opinions or attitudes that you have about vaccine mandates or affirmative action or the Electoral College, those attitudes, those opinions are not formed in a vacuum. See, I have little vacuums there to remind you that. Rather, your attitudes are shaped by the values that you hold, okay? And so your attitudes and your public opinion are a reflection of your values. Well, what are values? Well, values are the basic principles that shape your opinion, okay? And so your textbook talks about how when it comes to political values that in the United States, most Americans share and support the basic principles or the core values that make up American political culture. And we talked about this earlier in the semester when we were asking the question, what does it mean to be an American? And one of the answers we had was, well, what it means to be an American is that you embrace the basic principles or the core values of American political culture. And so most Americans support liberty, democracy, and equality. And so oftentimes that the opinions that you have are a reflection of those basic political principles or core values. And so your attitude about liberty, democracy, and equality can shape the attitudes you have about those political issues that we talked about in those questions. Okay, so going back to the public opinion questions we looked at earlier, it's likely that your attitude or your opinion about those issues was a reflection of political values that are important to you, your political principles. It's also likely that someone that holds the opposite opinion on the same issue that you do, they base their opinion on a political value, and it's very likely that they could base their opinion on the same political value or principle. How is that possible? Same principle, different ways of defining the principle. That's how it's possible. Hey, this all sounds pretty confusing, right? You're like, wait, I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But regardless, let's take a look at some concrete examples about how people who have differing opinions on the same issue, how they could base that opinion on the same shared value, but that the way that they define that value is different. So let's take a look at some concrete examples for clarification. Okay, so let's look at the opinions on the vaccine mandate and how that relates to the common shared value or principle of liberty. So one person could say that they don't support the vaccine mandates for all healthcare workers because it's the individual who should make the decision, not the government. Again, that is about liberty, right? It's the individual should be free from government constraining their actions. But on the other hand, a person could say, I do support vaccine mandates for healthcare workers because a person should be free to receive healthcare in a safe environment. So that if you go and you're a patient in a hospital, you should feel that you're not going to get sick, that you have the freedom from harm because you know that the workers who work there are vaccinated. So, both of those opinions are based upon the value, the principle, the political principle of liberty. But people define liberty differently and place different emphasis on the principle of liberty. On the one hand, on the top, that liberty is defined as that the government should not interfere with individual freedom. So in many ways, it's sort of like freedom from the government. That's how you define liberty. But in the lower, in the second answer, the second opinion, that's also about liberty, but it's a different way of thinking about liberty. It says that the government has an obligation to interfere with individual freedom if the exercising of that liberty harms the freedom of others. Okay, sort of like liberty, but with an obligation that government prevents your exercise of liberty from harming the freedoms of others. Sort of the balancing that we talked about when it came to civil liberties. But again, liberty is the core principle for those two different opinions. Okay, what about the question about affirmative action? Well, people can have attitudes about affirmative action that is a reflection of their understanding and the way that they define equality. So you could say, I don't support the use of affirmative action in college admissions because students should be equally evaluated on academic performance alone, not on race, that they should be treated equally, and that the only thing that you should look at is their academic performance. Race is not relevant to whether someone will succeed in college, okay? So that is basing your opinion on the value of equality. On the flip side of that, you could say, I do support the use of affirmative action because evaluating on academic record alone fails to recognize inherent racial inequalities in our K through 12 educational system. When we read the article, What is Owed, we saw that there were, inequalities, wealth inequality differences, and inequalities in terms of school funding that are a reflection of racial inequalities in the United States. So again, that it's based on equality, but a different way of thinking about equality. So again, we see that equality is defined differently here. On the top, equality is being defined as being treated as the same as others, versus that equality is based on the idea that there are times when treating people differently actually increases equality. Because if you're colorblind in the first, if you're saying everybody should be treated equal regardless of the color of their skin, well, we do know that the color of people's skin does dictate different treatment in the United States. And so being cognizant of that could justify treating people differently because people are treated differently based on the color of their skins. And so, again, a different way of defining equality. And now let's turn our sights to the Electoral College and the role that democracy as a core value might play in your attitudes about the Electoral College. So depending on how you answer that question on our discussion, you could say, you know what, you support getting rid of the Electoral College because democracy should be based on majority rule. What the majority wants is what should be reflected in who becomes the president of the United States. But you could have said that I think we should keep the Electoral College because while democracy is majority rule, democracy should also make sure that the concerns of those not in the majority should be considered when electing the president. And so this we're already familiar with in terms of different ways of defining democracy. Democracy can be defined as majority rules, whatever the majority wants, and there's good times for defining democracy in that way. But we can also think about majority rule we could also think about democracy as defined as majority rule, but with consideration of the interests of those who are not in the majority. And so both those attitudes about the Electoral College are a reflection of that core value, that core principle that you hold near and dear, which would be democracy. So as we know, we live in a really polarized political universe right now in the United States. And that, sometimes we are looking for methods for how to bring down the temperature, to bridge differences, and to see where our common interests are, so that we can talk about issues that we disagree about more civilly. So to foster civil discussion on a heated issue, where you can actually have a reasonable and level-headed conversation with somebody that you disagree with on a particular issue, it really does help to identify a shared value. And so this weekend, I was visiting down in central Illinois with my husband. We went to go visit his parents. And we had breakfast together with his parents and then also with his sister and her husband. And we started talking football, and then we started talking Aaron Rodgers, and then kind of a disagreement started brewing at the table about whether or not Aaron Rodgers, and his choice not to get the vaccine whether or not that was, right behavior. Should he have done that? And we sort of started, debating it a little bit, but then we all backed away. We're like, oh, let's just not have this conversation because we thought it would ruin breakfast. So we sort of walked away from it. Sometimes if you want to have a conversation with somebody you disagree with, it helps to find that shared value. And so when it comes to vaccine mandates, you could talk to somebody about why they are for or against vaccine mandates or whatever issue it is. And what the common ground that you can find is that you can say, hey, when it comes to vaccine mandates, we both really care about freedom, liberty, right? We really that's what unites us. But we differ on the role that government should play in realizing that freedom, whether government should stay out of the way or whether there are times when government should make sure that people's liberties aren't infringing upon the liberties of others. But what unites us is liberty. So it's a nice way of bridging differences and having civil conversations with people that you disagree with. Okay. So we know that our political opinions are a reflection of our values. So where do those values come from? Well, just as our opinions are a reflection of our values, our political values are not something that are inherent to us, but they're learned. We learn to, embrace democracy, equality, and liberty as a part of being born into a political culture that reveres and embraces those key core values. And so the political values are not innate. You're not naturally born loving liberty, loving democracy, but they are learned. And they're learned through what's known as the process of political socialization. And what political socialization is it's defined in your textbook by the induction of individuals into a particular political culture. It's learning the underlying beliefs and values on which a political system is based. And, one way of looking at it is it's how you learn what it means to be an American, learn what it means to be an Iranian or French or Nigeria or whatever political culture somebody lives in. So if you've ever been in another country, and I know there are people in this class who are from other countries, if you've ever been to another country, you'll notice that the political culture there can be really different. In many Asian countries, in Japan in particular, that there's not as much emphasis placed on individualism as collectivism. Like you look out more for the group, collective, interest and concern for the collective is an important principle in Asian cultures, where in the United States, an important principle is individualism. And we learned that, right? And so for my students who have lived in another country and now they're in the United States, they get sort of like the opportunity to sort of say, hey, this might have been the political culture I was born into, but now I'm living in this other political culture. And you can sort of see as a new member of this political culture, how you are being inducted into our political culture. And so political socialization is this process where you learn these underlying values. So in the next lecture, we're going to be taking a look at who's teaching us those values, okay? And so we learn those values through political socialization, and that political socialization takes place through specific agents of socialization. That is the institutions and groups that help shape an individual's basic political values and beliefs. So in the next slide, we're going to be taking a look at those agents of political socialization. And then you're also going to have extra credit opportunity to tell me about what have been the most formative agents of your political socialization in your life. Okay, talk to you again soon.